With the start of the new year comes the Lunar New Year, a holiday for families to come together, cook delicious food and enjoy each other's company. But 32-year-old Gia isn't happy. She's an out-of-work freelancer, though most would say she's unemployed. As she prepares food for the guests who have yet to arrive, her mother is sitting nearby, watching a cute video of her grandson. Gia, however, is irritated. Her family is getting in her way and eating the food she's cooked before the guests even arrive. When Gia suggests that her parents should cook since they're already eating, her mother reminds her that cooking is the least she could do, especially since she's still living at home without paying rent. Soon, Gia's sister Jimin arrives with her family. Their mother warmly embraces Jimin's daughter, while her husband carries their young son. Jimin, exhausted from the trip, immediately wants to sit down. Gia steps out of the shadows to greet her sister, offering her an almost forced smile. "Happy to see you," Gia says, handing Jimin a flower print apron. Jimin laughs and teases her, saying the apron looks great on Gia and that all she needs now is to walk down the aisle. Gia, not amused by the joke, coldly insists that Jimin put the apron on to help her cook. Their mother, not impressed by Gia's attitude, lightly scolds her. All Gia wants is for someone else to take over the cooking, but Jimin's husband steps in, explaining that Jimin is already exhausted and subtly hinting that she's pregnant with their third child. This announcement is big news for the family, and they gather around to eat soon after. Later, Gia steps outside to smoke, frustrated with her sister's seemingly perfect life and the constant pressure to meet someone. Her brooding is interrupted by a man she doesn't recognize at first. "Still got that foul mouth, I see," he says, surprising her. He's standing in the smoking area, eating chicken breast, which catches Gia off guard. After a moment, the man introduces himself as Minchul Jin. Minchul mentions that he used to live next door and wore headphones all the time. Gia doesn't recognize him at first, but then realizes he was that scrawny gamer kid from her childhood. Minchul, however, doesn't think he's changed much. Gia insists otherwise, pointing out how strange it is to see him eating chicken breast in a smoking area. Minchul explains that he's here because his family wasn't happy with him avoiding the Lunar New Year food. Too many calories, they said. Gia suddenly remembers that Minchul is the same age as her, 32, and that they grew up in the same building. They were childhood friends, but not by choice. Minchul was the shy kid who didn't get along with anyone in class. Despite the shared past, Gia doesn't feel like reminiscing. Instead, she wonders how Minchul managed to change so much. She concludes that city life must have transformed him. Now, he's an assistant manager and programmer at a well-known company, living what seems to be a decent life. This realization makes Gia reflect on her own situation. She's constantly scolded at home, unemployed, and can't believe that Minchul, the awkward kid from her childhood, is doing better than she is. Feeling a surge of envy, Gia begins to sulk. Sensing her mood, Minchul interrupts and asks how she's been. Gia deflects the question, but Minchul keeps talking. He admits that while he thinks he's doing well, his parents don't agree. They've been nagging him to get married and even signed him up for a dating service, paying a $5,000 registration fee. With a small laugh, he assumes Gia isn't facing the same pressure. Gia, surprising even herself, suddenly suggests that they get married. Minchul is taken aback, staring at her in disbelief. Gia explains her reasoning. Since both their parents are constantly nagging them to settle down, marrying each other would solve the problem. "It's a win-win," she says casually. To Gia's further surprise, Minchul, though still in shock, asks her father for his blessing, and before they know it, they're married. For their honeymoon, they travel to a tropical destination. On their first night, while Gia is having a drink, the reality of what's happened finally hits her. She stares into her glass, shocked that she isn't dreaming. She's actually in a different country, married to Minchul. Later that night, as they prepare for bed, Minchul rummages through his suitcase. Gia watches him, wondering what he's looking for. When he mentions that he's searching for something to make their first night together comfortable, Gia's mind jumps to conclusions. Embarrassed, she blurts out that she's not ready for that yet, but to her surprise, Minchul simply hands her a pair of earplugs. "Sometimes I snore," he explains with a sheepish grin. That night, after Minchul starts snoring, Gia puts in the earplugs and drifts off to sleep, noting how practical and prepared he is. The next morning, Gia starts worrying that their happy honeymoon could go downhill if they start fighting. As she carefully selects her outfit, Minchul appears in unfashionable but comfortable clothes, including socks with sandals. He asks how much longer Gia's going to take. She winces at his outfit, and when he asks if it matters, Gia insists it does because people will be looking at them. Since their schedule isn't tight, they decide to go clothes shopping. Although Gia doesn't know much about fashion, she assumes anything would be better than Minchul's current outfit. But she's wrong. Minchul emerges from the dressing room in a bright red and blue outfit with suspenders. His reasoning? The bright colours will keep him from getting hit by a car. Gia, frustrated, hands him a simple shirt and pants, telling him they look nice. Minchul is so pleased that he asks the store clerk for 7 sets of the same outfit. Outraged, Gia tries to explain that it's better to have a variety, but Minchul is insistent. Since the outfit looks good, he wants multiple copies. Gia decides to pick out a few new outfits herself so Minchul can rotate between them. While she's browsing, Minchul notices the swimsuits and, with sudden excitement, asks if he can choose one for her for their upcoming banana boat ride. Without thinking, Gia agrees, but then quickly feels embarrassed, realizing what he's just asked. After finishing their shopping, they head to the shore, but Gia can't shake her embarrassment about Minchul picking out her swimsuit. Gia feels obligated to wear the swimsuit Minchul bought for their next activity, even though she has no idea what he chose. She fears he might have picked a sexy one, but to her surprise, Minchul bought her a wetsuit, matching his. To Minchul, it was the best choice, offering comfort and insulation. However, Gia feels embarrassed by his choice. After all, this is their honeymoon and everyone else is wearing bikinis and swim shorts. She worries that the wetsuit will be too hot, but to her surprise, it turns out to be very comfortable. The two have a wonderful time on the banana boat, eating, laughing, and taking pictures throughout the day. As the sun starts to set, Gia and Minchul walk along the beach. Gia, wanting to make the most of their expensive trip, tries to pack in as much as possible. Minchul, however, notices an injury on her heel and suggests she take it easy. Gia hadn't realized she was hurt, caught up in the excitement. Minchul offers to give her a piggyback ride, insisting that walking on an injured heel must be painful. Gia hesitates, concerned about sticking to their schedule, but eventually hops onto Minchul's back. Feeling embarrassed, Gia asks if she's heavy. Minchul, always practical, responds that her weight makes it a good workout, which offends her a little. As they continue walking, Gia begins to feel comforted by Minchul's steady presence and warmth. She notices the beautiful sunset and insists they take a picture. Minchul initially resists, but Gia insists, saying they should live in the moment. Back at the hotel, Gia scrolls through the pictures and remembers her sister's words about how couples usually fight on their honeymoon. But despite her worries, she and Minchul didn't argue at all. They had fun together. As she watches Minchul peacefully sleeping, Gia reflects on the trip and, despite the embarrassing moments, feels content and satisfied with how it all turned out. Back in Korea, Gia's mum prepared a feast and packed several boxes of food to celebrate Gia's return and help her move in with Minchul. Although Gia feels apprehensive about the whole situation, she reminds herself that she agreed to this when they got married. After the move, Minchul hands Gia a piece of paper. At that moment, a random memory pops into Gia's mind. A cartoon theme song with the lyrics, "Just do it, just do it. It's okay to make mistakes because you aren't an adult yet." Gia now realizes that, as an adult, making mistakes means you're stuck dealing with the consequences. Since she was the one who suggested they get married, Gia reflects on how her life has spiraled out of control, and now here she is, living with Minchul. She looks back at the paper. It's a contract for living together. Shocked, she throws it on the floor, but quickly accepts that they probably do need a contract. Each of them writes down 3 conditions. Minchul's rules are no smoking, don't bother mouse, and communicate if something is wrong. Jia's rules are, don't enter a room without knocking, don't force anything, and communicate if something is wrong. Jia is outraged by the no-smoking rule, noting that even her dad couldn't get her to quit. But Minchul explains that he doesn't like the smell, so he suggests she smoke in moderation. Confused, Jia asks, "Who's Mouse?" Minchul points to the cat currently lounging at Jia's feet. "That's Mouse," he explains, chuckling. He named the cat Mouse because cats like mice. Jia admits she likes the cat, but jokingly asks what would have happened if she didn't. Minchul, unfazed, says he would have just gotten another room for her to live in. After all, money wouldn't be an issue. He's serious about making the marriage work. They agree on the rest of the terms and officially sign the contract. Minchul adds one final clause. Either party can terminate the contract any time. Jia can't help but foreshadow that this contract will bring them both tears and laughter. On their first night living together, Jia decides not to unpack just yet, and instead orders some furniture. Minchul is set to return to work the next day, and Jia feels anxious about living with someone other than her family. Minchul, on the other hand, is calm and spends the evening gaming. The next morning, Jia is woken by the sound of Minchul cooking breakfast. Curious and a little impressed, she gets up to join him. However, her excitement fades quickly when she sees him blend chicken breast into a smoothie. Jia takes a sip and grimaces, finding it terrible. Hoping for something else, she asks if they're having anything more substantial. Minchul casually hands her a protein bar, which only frustrates Jia further. She complains, saying this isn't real food, and adds that he'll probably enjoy a delicious lunch at work without her. Minchul corrects her, proudly showing off his healthy lunch, which is just as bland as his breakfast. Jia opens the fridge, hoping to find something better, but it's stocked full of health food. At that moment, she develops a new appreciation for her mum's home-cooked meals. Sensing her frustration, Minchul suggests that Jia go out and get breakfast on her own. Jia, unsure, asks if he's fine with that, and Minchul reassures her that all he needs is his smoothie. Jia has been used to eating meals with her family, but she remembers that this is a contract marriage now. After Minchul leaves for work, Jia tells herself that she's going to get a job soon and promises to see him at dinner. But the moment the door closes behind him, she changes her mind and proudly declares, "I'm staying unemployed until my bank account is empty." Minchul is on his way to work when he gets into the car of his colleague, Sang-yu Choi. Surprised, Sang-yu asks why Minchul suddenly submitted a request for 10 days of vacation. He then notices something unusual. Minchul is smiling, which is rare for him. Curious, Sang-yu asks if something good happened. Minchul, remembering Jia saying goodbye to him that morning, replies, "It's nice knowing someone's waiting for you at home." Sang-yu is confused, so Minchul clarifies, "My wife is at home." Shocked, Sang-yu thinks Minchul is joking, but Minchul confirms that he got married last week. When they arrive at the office, word spreads quickly and everyone congratulates Minchul. He hands out souvenirs from his honeymoon, but before Sang-yu can start his day, their manager, Soo-yeon-so, pulls him aside, visibly upset. Soo-yeon, who had been quietly harboring feelings for Minchul, is irritated to hear about his marriage. She vents to Sang-yu, suggesting that she had liked Minchul. Sang-yu is surprised, noting that Minchul had never seemed interested in dating. The narrative then shifts to Soo-yeon's backstory, a 33-year-old who was once considered a child genius. She's climbed the ranks of success but remains single. Despite her achievements, she's always yearned for a moderately okay guy. As she reflects on her situation, it hits her. Minchul was that decent guy she'd been hoping for all along. Now that he's married, her dreams are shattered. Desperate for advice, Soo-yeon decides to consult with Sung-yu, who attended university with her and is known as the company Cupid, for his ability to navigate office relationships. After work, Sang-yu and Soo-yeon decide to follow Minchul home to see if he's really married. As they approach, they spot Minchul talking to a woman on the street. The woman is Jia, standing with an angry expression, smoking. Jia is upset because Minchul didn't call to let her know he'd be coming home late, and she had waited for him to eat dinner together. Sangyu and Suyeon, hiding around the corner, are skeptical that Jia is the type of woman Minchul would be interested in. Minchul, thinking back to breakfast, assumes Jia didn't want to eat with him because of his chicken breast smoothie, but Jia clarifies that the real issue is he didn't call her. Minchul, a bit confused, asks, "Am I allowed to call you now? You didn't like me calling in 5th grade when I asked if you wanted to play." Jia explains that back then she had to use the house phone and was embarrassed. But before they can get deeper into the conversation, Minchul notices Sangyu and Suyeon peeking from around the corner. He reassures Jia, "Okay, I'll call next time." Later that evening, Minchul has another chicken breast smoothie for dinner, much to Jia's dismay. As she watches him, Jia reflects on their past. She remembers how they used to be close, especially in their younger years, but that changed around 5th grade. Jia had stopped hanging out with Minchul because she was teased for being friends with a boy. She continued to avoid him throughout middle school, and now, looking at him, she feels guilty about being angry at him over something so small. Before she can apologize, Minchul surprises Jia by ordering her favorite food, spicy chicken feet. The gesture makes her soften, and she realizes that despite the awkwardness between them, Minchul still remembers the little things that make her happy. Jia suddenly barges into Minchul's room, ignoring the no-entry rule. Minchul immediately points it out, but Jia retorts, "There's a problem, and we need to talk it out to fix it." Reluctantly, Minchul agrees, and they sit down to have a conversation. Jia starts by complaining that Minchul didn't get her any beer to go with the spicy chicken feet. Then, getting to the point, she admits they've never really had a proper conversation, so she thought it might be a good time to talk while they eat. Jia offers Minchul a beer, but he declines without hesitation. Concerned, she asks if something's wrong, but Minchul explains that he's just avoiding beer to maintain his gains from working out. Instead of drinking beer, Minchul grabs a bottle of water and asks Jia what she really wanted to talk about. Flustered, Jia realizes she didn't actually have a plan, so she improvises. 2 hours later. Jia is drunk, rambling on about their childhood, reminiscing about how they used to play games together. Minchul listens, amused by her stories, while Jia fondly recalls their younger years. Despite the awkward start, their conversation brings back memories that bridge the gap between them, reminding Jia of the bond they once shared. Jia falls asleep, but Minchul abruptly wakes her up with the sound of an alarm. He tells her to go to her room and sleep while he cleans up. Still in a drunken haze, Jia realizes that she's tipsy from drinking the alcohol meant for 2 people. In her drunken state, Jia asks Minchul if she can see his ear. When he approaches, she playfully takes off his glasses and remarks on how bad his eyesight is. Minchul, a bit annoyed, asks for his glasses back, and to get them he gently pushes Jia against the wall. Jia is having fun until she suddenly notices how attractive Minchul looks without his glasses, and just how close they are to each other. Embarrassed by the sudden realization, she quickly hands the glasses back to him and runs to her room, feeling flustered and unsure of what to do next. The next morning, Jia watches Minchul leave for work, feeling the urge to apologize for what happened the night before, hoping they can return to normal. As she tries to say sorry, nervousness overtakes her, and instead she blurts out, "I'm Yao because the cat said meow." Minchul looks at her, completely confused. At work, Minchul asks Sungyu about Jia's strange meowing incident. Sungyu, thinking Minchul is joking or bragging, is taken aback, but Minchul is genuinely puzzled. Sungyu suggests that Jia was probably trying to be cute, but Minchul insists they aren't close enough to joke around like that. Sungyu, who supposedly has a doctorate in low biology, proposes a simple solution. Minchul should show Jia some sympathy. So, when Minchul gets home, he meows at Jia. Jia falls to the floor in embarrassment. Minchul casually says, "Sungyu said this would help." But Jia, already upset, snaps at him. She's angry that he shared their personal moment with others, especially since they added a clause to their contract about keeping things private between them. A few days later, Suyeon suggests Minchul host a housewarming party. When Minchul tells Jia, she's initially hesitant, but after some thought she agrees to go along with it. Minchul asks why she's willing to do it, and Jia explains that housewarming parties, typically held after moving into a new home or getting married, are a way to ask for continued support. While it's not required, it's a once-in-a-lifetime. Normally, it's something to avoid because of all the work involved, but Jia wants to do it because Minchul hates the idea. It's her way of getting back at him for embarrassing her the day before. The next day, after protesting with Jia about not needing a housewarming party, Minchi leaves for work with a smile. Jia has noticed a few key traits about him. 1. Minchio is all about efficiency, almost like an eco-friendly robot. 2. Minchil is weak to requests and will comply if pushed enough. Based on these traits, Jia assumes that Minchil will tell his co-workers that his wife didn't want a party. However, when she learns what Minchil refers to her as at work, she becomes embarrassed and starts to regret her decision. Despite this, she begins preparations for the housewarming, even though she doesn't know how to cook well, leading her to call her mother for help. As the guests begin to arrive, Jia whispers to Minchil that he should be nice to her during the gathering. The partygoers are amazed at the spread of food Jia has prepared, though Minchil clearly doesn't want to be there and starts drinking. Sungyu, one of the guests, asks Suyeon if she feels satisfied knowing Minchil is actually married, but Suyeon, unfazed, reveals she has something prepared to test them. Sungyu then proposes an activity where they all get to know Minchil better, explaining that everyone wrote down something they wanted to ask him. The first request comes from Suyeon, and to everyone's surprise, it is for Minchil and Jia to kiss. Jia is curious to hear the request, but Sungyu hesitates before reading it aloud, sensing the tension building. The next question comes up, and Jia, eager to avoid a headache, quietly tells Minchil they should just pretend to be a happy couple for the evening. The question is, when, where, and how did he propose? If they can't answer, they have to drink a whole glass of beer. Jia scrambles for a good fake response but can't come up with anything convincing. To her surprise, Minchil casually responds, "Jia proposed to me in a smoking area while I was eating chicken breast. This, to Jia's shock, is true." Unsure how to handle the truth coming out in such a casual setting, Jia chooses to stay quiet and drink. The next question follows. When and where was your first kiss? This presents a bigger problem. Jia and Minchil haven't kissed, not even at their wedding. Resigned, Jia prepares to drink again, but before she can, Minchil jumps in with another unexpected answer. "We kissed when we were 5. In kindergarten," he says confidently. Jia stares at him confused until he explains. "Your nickname back then was the smooching ghost because you went around kissing everyone." Jia turns red with embarrassment, angry that Minchil would bring up something so silly from her past. Eventually the party winds down and the guests leave, but not without suspicion. Sungyu and Suyeon agree that something about Minchil and Jia's interactions felt forced, almost too practiced. Sungyu, worried, asks Suyeon if they should dig deeper into the couple's relationship, but Suyeon surprises him by saying no. Sungyu is taken aback by her sudden shift and almost gets into an accident while driving. Suyeon reassures him. "It's okay. I didn't think I could force my way into their relationship anyway," she says with a mix of resignation and acceptance. Sungyu, still startled, suggests they go out for a drink to clear their heads, and they end up at a fancy barbecue place. The night blurs in a haze of alcohol and conversation, and suddenly the two wake up the next morning in the same bed, naked. Sungyu, shocked and confused, wonders aloud if this could be the beginning of something romantic, as the reality of what happened between them starts to sink in. Back in Jia and Minchil's apartment, Jia confronts Minchil about why talking about their kindergarten kiss and his proposal in a smoking area is so embarrassing for her. She thinks it's common sense to avoid such stories, but then she remembers she's dealing with Minchil, whose understanding of social cues can be a bit off. She sighs and suggests we should probably pick another time for our first kiss. Just as they start discussing it, Jia's phone rings. It's her mum, calling excitedly to tell her that Spaghetti Man Loses His Way just came out today. Spaghetti Man is a franchise that essentially launched the hero movie craze, and Jia's family is obsessed. "Did you already watch it?" Gia asks, half joking, and her mum immediately says yes. Before her mum can spoil any details, Gia cuts her off and quickly ends the call. Her family has a long-standing tradition where if you don't watch a movie the day it comes out, whoever sees it first gets to spoil it for everyone else. The competition is especially fierce for major releases like Spaghetti Man, so Gia knows they have to watch it immediately. "Mitchell, we need to watch it now," she declares, grabbing her coat. Later, at the movie theatre, Gia settles into her seat, happily munching on popcorn while Minchia seems unusually tense. Midway through the film, he quietly says, "This feels like a date." Gia is caught off guard by the comment and finds herself momentarily flustered, but she quickly focuses back on the movie. The movie turns out to be fantastic, but an awkward moment happens when Gia and Minchi both reach for the popcorn at the same time, their hands brushing against each other. They both pull back, a little embarrassed. Afterward, as they leave the theatre, Gia excitedly chats about the film, dissecting every detail. She suddenly realizes that the whole evening felt, well, like a date. Unbeknownst to her, Minchiul has been a Spaghetti Man fan for over 20 years, following the series from the beginning. He listens intently to Gia's thoughts but remains quiet about his own long-standing phantom, his mind more focused on the fact that this outing really did feel like a date, something that catches both of them by surprise. As Gia and Minchiul were leaving the theatre, Gia suddenly got pushed from behind by the crowd. Instinctively, Minchiul caught her in his arms. The abruptness of the moment caused them to accidentally kiss. Shocked, Minchiul quickly put her down. Flustered, Gia blurted out, "That didn't count, the 3-second rule," before running away in embarrassment. Minchiul found her a little later in the smoking area, where he made her air out her clothes. He stood beside her, confirming, "You're right, the kiss didn't count because of the 3-second rule." Gia nodded, trying to brush it off, but the tension between them lingered. They decided to go grab lunch together, but throughout the meal, Gia couldn't shake the image of the accidental kiss. She felt like she was overreacting, but before she could sort out her thoughts, Minchiul cleared his throat and said, "I need to get something off my chest." He paused, looking slightly uncomfortable, then admitted, "The kiss wasn't 3 seconds. It was 5. Gia stared at him in disbelief as he continued, "So, maybe we should count it as our first kiss?" He smiled, thinking he was being reasonable, but Gia's face flushed with anger. Without a word, she stood up and ran out of the restaurant, too overwhelmed to look at Minchi. Needing space, Gia decided to stay with her sister, Jaemin. When she arrived, Jaemin and her husband Gino were unimpressed by the situation. Jaemin sighed, while Gino shook his head, clearly used to Gia's dramatics. This was when the 1326 Honest Gia Summit began. A mental gathering of Gia from 6 different ages to help her navigate the crisis. Each version of Gia, arranging from her 5-year-old self to her present self, appeared in her mind's eye to discuss the situation. Present day, Gia explained what happened, admitting she thought Minchi's comment about the kiss was rude. 15-year-old Gia chimed in, suggesting she stay at a friend's place instead of running to her sister, but Gia quickly shot that down as not being possible. Meanwhile, 30-year-old Gia offered a more level-headed approach, telling her to consider Minchi's feelings instead of storming off. Regardless of the summit's deliberations, Gia's plan to stay with Jaemin worked because her sister owed her a favor. Gia had played a key role in bringing Jaemin and Gino together, giving them money for dates and convincing them to get married. This, of course, meant Gia was free to hide out at their place for as long as she needed, while she sorted out her feelings about Minjiul and the unexpected kiss. However, Jaemin is not as thrilled as Gia expected, despite Gia having helped her in the past. As they start talking, they note how Jaemin's children have adopted some of Gia's quirky habits. When Jaemin tries to spoil Spaghetti Man for Gia, she proudly reveals that she already watched it, much to Jaemin's disappointment. Jaemin then asks Gia what happened between her and Minchiul, quickly guessing that Gia ran away after a fight. Gia admits it, and with a smirk, Jaemin agrees to let Gia stay, but only if she babysits the kids so that she and Gino can have a night out. Gia isn't thrilled, but she doesn't have much of a choice. After 2 exhausting hours of watching over the kids, Gia realizes how tough parenting really is. Just as she's finally getting the kids settled, the doorbell rings. Assuming it's a delivery, she opens the door, only to find Minchel standing there. Startled, she slams the door shut, her heart racing. "What is he doing here?" she mutters to herself. One of the kids, munching on ice cream, innocently comments, "Aunt Jamin said if someone who looks like Minchely comes, we should let him in because he's food." Gia quickly realizes she's been set up. Reluctantly, Gia opens the door again and lets Minchel in. While the kids are distracted with their ice cream, Gia and Minchel sit down to talk. Minchel reveals that Jamin called him and told him Gia was staying at her place. Gia protests at the meddling, but Minchel calmly reminds her that, per their agreement, they need to talk things out when problems arise. He then asks, "Why are you mad, Gia?" She's momentarily at a loss, scooping up ice cream for the kids as she thinks it over. Minchel, who's turned down the ice cream himself, patiently waits. After a moment of reflection, Gia realizes that maybe it wasn't such a big deal. After all, they're both adults. By the time Jamin and Gino return, Gia and Minchel have made peace and they leave together, heading back to their apartment. Gia can't help but feel a little more settled, though she's still unsure about what their relationship is turning into. On their way back to the apartment, Minchel breaks the silence by apologizing. "I should have thought more about it and said sorry earlier," he admits. Gia eyes him skeptically. "You're only saying that because you think it's what I want to hear," she replies. She crosses her arms and then adds, "I think you should be punished," with a forehead flick. Minchie's eyes widen in alarm. "No, not a forehead flick," he protests, clearly distressed. "I have trauma from forehead flicking." Gia pauses, surprised by his reaction. "Forehead flick trauma?" she asks, but doesn't push for details. She sighs, placing her finger against his forehead, but before she flicks him, she admits, "I'm mad because I don't want my first kiss to be an accident." Instead of flicking him, Gia leans in and gently kisses him on the forehead. "This," she says softly, "is our first kiss." Michia stands frozen, unsure how to respond but also relieved. They continue walking in silence, a subtle shift in their dynamic hanging in the air. The next day at work, Minchu talks with Sungu, still thinking about Gia. "Gia's mad that people think our first kiss was back in kindergarten. I don't know how to fix that," he says, sounding concerned. Sungu bursts out laughing, causing heads to turn. "This is nothing to worry about," he shouts. "Trust me, you're overthinking it." He looks exhausted, rubbing his eyes. Minchil frowns. "But you all left the party laughing and smiling. Why are you so tired?" Sungu glances away, clearly avoiding the question. Before Minyol can press him further, Suyeon walks by. She's been avoiding eye contact with Sungyu ever since the night they woke up in bed together. The tension is palpable. Suyeon, spotting Minyol's wave, panics and flees without a word. Songhyo, still flustered, clears his throat and reintroduces himself to Minchkyo, as if they've never met. "I'm Songhyo, by the way," he says, suddenly very chatty. He starts bragging about having a doctorate in low biology, though Minchkyo knows it's all a bluff. Songhyo in reality is an introvert who prefers staying home, but seems desperate to appear more outgoing in this moment. Minchia listens quietly, amused at Sunghyu's antics but unable to shake his own thoughts about Gia and how their relationship is evolving. Since Sunggu has 3 sisters, he's always been surrounded by conversations about relationships. This made him an expert at picking up on subtle clues from women, a skill that manifested early on. By the time he was a teenager, he'd earned the title of God of Dating, not because he had a girlfriend, but because he was able to match so many people together. Despite all this, Sunggu had never actually been in a relationship himself. After his unexpected entanglement with Suryan, Sungyu felt lost. Suryan had apologized right after, leaving him even more confused. He had first met Suryan in college. He was a freshman, and she was a senior. Back then she was demanding and intimidating, but now she was just another adult, and it seemed like they both wanted to forget what had happened that night. Despite their decision, the awkwardness between them grew with every passing encounter, a reminder that neither of them had fully matured emotionally. One day they found themselves in the elevator together. The silence was thick, and Sunyu's heart pounded in his chest. Mustering some courage, he broke the silence and called out to Su-yen, but as soon as he opened his mouth, his courage faltered and he couldn't bring himself to say anything meaningful. Before he could gather his thoughts, a delivery man entered the elevator, breaking the moment. As the day wore on, Sungyu's thoughts were still consumed by Su-yen. He couldn't shake the feelings of confusion and regret. Min-jiel, noticing Sungyu's distracted demeanor, handed him a red ginseng stick and asked, "What's wrong?" Su-yen hesitated for a moment, then shook his head. "Nothing's wrong," he lied, though his mind remained tangled in the mess of emotions surrounding Su-yen. Despite his expert knowledge of relationships from years of observation, when it came to his own feelings, Su-yen was just as lost as anyone else. Sungyu suddenly has a profound realization. Min-jiel is married. Maybe he can help solve this problem. After some hesitation, Sungyu decides to ask for advice. "How do you break the awkwardness after a fight?" he asks, hoping for some concrete guidance. Min-jiel, momentarily thrown off, remembers that he's not supposed to talk much about his marriage to Jia. However, he also recalls that sometimes being flexible can help. He finally replies, "Our last fight. It was resolved when Jia kissed me." Sungyu's face falls. This wasn't the kind of advice he was looking for. He nods politely but walks away feeling more frustrated than ever. He gives out great relationship advice all the time, yet no one seems able to help him with his own problems. As he heads home after work, Sungyu's mind churns with annoyance. In desperation, he decides to call his second oldest sister, Yenju. Yenju is a successful romance novelist and influencer with a keen understanding of relationships, or at least the fictional ones she writes about. When Sungyu explains his problem, he tells her it's actually a friend's problem to save face. Yenju is quick to catch on, but she's willing to help, under one condition. "You get me 2 boxes of those macarons I love, and I'll give you advice," she says with a playful tone. Sunyu sighs but agrees. However, just as she's about to start giving advice, Yenju pauses and asks, "Wait, is this friend of yours named Choi by any chance?" Realizing that she's onto him, Sungyu panics and abruptly hangs up the phone. He groans in frustration, feeling even more stuck. But just as he's about to give up, he unexpectedly runs into Jia. Their conversation starts awkwardly, full of small talk, but it doesn't last long. Sensing the tension, Jia quickly says, "I have to go," and darts off, leaving Sungyu alone once again. He watches her leave, feeling like the universe is playing a cruel joke on him today. Sungyu pauses, staring at Jia, feeling like he recognizes her from somewhere. "Wait a second," he blurts out. "Are you flaming hot chicken feet?" Jia freezes, her eyes widening in shock. She quickly tries to play it cool, pretending not to know what he's talking about. I don't know what you mean," she stammers, but Sungyu isn't convinced. "You're Yenju's little brother, right?" he continues, ignoring her attempt to deflect. "She's always talking about her friends and writers. She's written, 'Is it hot because it's summer?' and 'Why would I be a no for Miss No?' I even got her autograph once. I'm pretty sure you're flaming hot chicken feet." Her friend from back in college? Jia's heart sinks. She'd always kept her pen name a secret from most people, but here was Sungyu of all people piecing it together. Reluctantly, she sighs. "Okay, fine," she admits. "That's me." Back in college, Jia had chosen a practical major to get a stable job rather than pursuing her passion. She had barely gotten into university and struggled to enjoy the social aspects of it. With little to do, she often spent time at her friend's place, her friend being Yenju Choi. Yenju was shy and quiet, but what made her stand out was her love of writing novels. Jia had admired Yenju's writing and, out of sheer boredom, decided to try her hand at it too. To her surprise, within 3 months, Jia won an award and officially became a writer under the pen name Flaming Hot Chicken Feet. It was meant to be a joke name since she never expected to win. Yenju, however, seemed a little jealous. She debuted soon after Jia, but their relationship had become complicated because of it. Now Sungyu had caught on, and she had no choice but to face it. Jia agrees to go with him to a nearby cafe, hoping to steer the conversation away from her past. At the cafe, Sunyu lays out his problem, his complicated feelings for Suyen. Jia listens patiently, sipping her coffee, then asks, "Do you need someone to just listen to you, or someone to give you a push?" Sungyu looks at her, shocked. He hadn't expected such a direct question. Jia leans forward and continues. "It's pretty obvious to me that you're interested in her, but the real question is, what are you going to do about it?" Sungyu feels a wave of realization wash over him. Jia's words hit him harder than any advice he'd gotten so far. "I guess I haven't thought that far ahead," he admits quietly. Jia smiles knowingly. "Well, it's time to start thinking." After hearing Jia's advice, Sungyu leaves, muttering to himself, "Writers have no empathy, but I guess that was still useful." He walks away with a sense of determination and quickly decides to call Su-yan. When she answers, her voice is filled with surprise. "Sungyu?" she asks, puzzled. "Why are you calling so late?" "I just wanted to hear your voice," Sungyu replies nervously, but even as the words leave his mouth, he realizes that wasn't enough. "Actually, can I come over? I'm already outside." Suyin is caught off guard. "Outside? Right now?" She glances at the clock. It's late, and she's already taken off her makeup and gotten ready for bed. Flustered, she hesitates. I'm not ready for visitors," she admits, but ultimately she agrees. "Give me 30 minutes. True to her word, Suyin appears at the door half an hour later, dressed in an intricate outfit that seems a bit too elaborate for such a late-hour meeting. They head to the playground nearby and sit on the swings. As they sway gently back and forth, Sungli breaks the silence by handing her a box of macarons. "I got these for you. They're from that place with the long lines." Sulian's eyes widen in delight. "These are amazing," she says, impressed. "Thank you." She seems ready to leave, thinking this was the sole reason for his visit. But Sungyu stops her. "Wait. Don't go yet. Let's stay here a bit longer," he pleads. "It's fun, isn't it?" Suyin frowns, sensing something deeper. "What's really going on, Sunyu?" Taking a deep breath, Sungyu musters up the courage to say what's been on his mind. "We need to talk about that day." Suyin's expression shifts. "We agreed to forget about it," she replies firmly, but her voice betrays her own lingering doubts. "I know," Sungyu says, his voice trembling slightly. "I tried, really, but I can't." Suyin looks at him, confusion evident in her eyes. "Why not? You're the expert, the relationship matchmaker. Why is this so hard for you?" Sungyu chuckles bitterly. "That's the thing. It was my first time. I've never done anything like that before." Suyin shakes her head in disbelief. "But you're supposed to be this relationship expert, right? The guy who knows everything about dating." He smiles sadly. "That's the image, sure, but it's not me." Silence falls between them, only the creaking of the swings filling the air. Sungyu takes one final breath and says, "If you really want me to forget about it, I will. But I just needed you to know how I felt." Suyin stares at him, her thoughts swirling, unsure of what to say next. The weight of the moment presses down on them both as they sit quietly, side by side, the swings slowly coming to a stop. Suyin sits silently for a moment, contemplating Sungyu's words. She knows she should say something, but how does one forget something so significant? I don't know how to tell you how to forget it," she admits, her voice tinged with frustration. I don't even want to forget it, Sungyu. The words hang between them, heavy with unspoken emotions. The silence stretches out before them, and Sungyu can feel the weight of the moment. Neither of them knows how to move forward, but neither can quite let go of what happened. Suddenly, the scene shifts. At Mitchell's house, Gia is lounging on the couch, nibbling on macarons. Mitchell, ever observant, looks at her and asks casually, "Did you gain weight?" Gia nearly chokes on her macarons, shocked at the unexpected comment. "What?" she exclaims, her eyes wide in disbelief. "No, I didn't." But Mitchell isn't talking about Gia. His gaze is directed at Mouse, who is waddling around the room looking unusually plump. Mouse apparently has been sneaking extra snacks. Gia tries to brush it off, suggesting that maybe the cold weather was causing Mouse to bulk up for hibernation. Mitchell nods in agreement and turns up the thermostat, not suspecting anything more. The next morning, as Mitchell heads off to work, Gia cheerfully tells him to have a great day. But Mitchell surprises her with a simple, "See you tonight." Gia, feeling a little uneasy, wonders if Mitchell has caught on to her secret habit of feeding Mouse extra snacks. Gia recalled how Mitchell's pet feeder dispenses a strict 3.3 ounces of food per day for Mouse, but Mouse had been crying for snacks, so Gia had given in, sneaking extra food. That's why Mouse had gained weight, and Gia had played it off by telling herself it was just a phase or the cold weather. But today, when she picked Mouse up, she could feel the difference. Mouse was heavier. It wasn't just Mouse, though. Gia had been ordering delivery constantly, indulging in comfort food after long days. She thought she'd been managing, but when she stepped on the scale this morning, the number startled her. It was much higher than she expected. The scale must be broken, she tried to convince herself. But when she bent down to tie her shoes, the sudden rip of fabric made her realize it wasn't just the scale that had changed. That evening, after some thought, Gia asks Mitchell, "Can you teach me how to work out?" Mitchell raises an eyebrow, looking surprised at the sudden request. Gia, now fully aware that something needed to change, knows this is the first step. She can't ignore the reality of it anymore. She needs to take charge of her health and make some adjustments, starting with a workout plan. Mitchell is absolutely thrilled when Gia asks him to teach her how to work out. He eagerly asks, "When can we start?" His enthusiasm is contagious, and he's already planning their next steps. He's known for being incredibly dedicated to his fitness routine, working out every day after work. But when Gia gives it a try, she quickly realizes how intense it is. After a few sets, her body feels like it's giving out, and she's left incapacitated. She still has legs to do, but she can barely move. In the midst of her exhaustion, Gia falls into a dream. She finds herself standing on a beach, staring out at the horizon as a giant asteroid hurtles toward Earth. "This is our last night," she says to Mitchell, her voice tinged with urgency. "What should we do to make it meaningful?" Mitchell, always the fitness enthusiast, looks at her with unwavering determination and says, "The answer is obvious. We work on legs." Gia laughs, but before she can respond, she wakes up from the dream, only to find herself sore and unable to move from the intense workout. Mitchell, ever excited that she wanted to get in shape, is concerned about how much she's struggling. He had no idea just how difficult it would be for her, but he's committed to helping her push through. Back at the gym, Gia is doing lunges while Mitchell cheers her on, his enthusiasm never waning. "You've got this, Gia," he encourages, but Gia is questioning her decision to start working out at all. At home, Mitchell is preparing vegetables for Gia's post-workout meal, suggesting she take a walk to recover. But Gia, frustrated, steps on the scale, only to find it hasn't changed. "I should have lost at least 6 pounds by now," she thinks, but the scale mocks her. Mitchell, ever the optimist, insists, "If you do a routine every day, you'll see improvements. 3 minutes a day, that's all it takes." He sets out a small but effective routine for her to follow, starting with a 60-second plank. Gia struggles immediately. The plank is harder than she thought, and doing 3 sets of it feels nearly impossible. After finishing the sets, Jia can only think, I think I might have died. Her arms feel like jelly, and the soreness has set in deep. But through it all, she looks over at Mitchell, who's benching 350 pounds for reps without breaking a sweat. She's amazed at how strong he is, wondering how he makes it look so easy. It's clear that they have very different fitness levels, and for the first time, Gia realizes just how far she has to go. Her journey toward fitness might be tough, but with Mitchell by her side, she's determined to keep pushing forward, no matter how sore she gets. While at the gym, a girl approaches Mitchell and asks if he's a personal trainer. Mitchell looks at her, confused, but she continues, clearly hoping for help. She asks if he could show her how to use the machines. Mitchell, always kind and eager to help, agrees, and Gia watches, her stomach sinking. As Mitchell demonstrates the exercises, including squats, the girl is a bit too touchy, her hands lingering on him as she mimics his movements. Gia watches in silent frustration, unable to ignore how uncomfortable it makes her feel. When the girl trips in a cute, exaggerated manner and claims it's her first time working out, Gia can't help but roll her eyes. She's pretty sure it's not her first time at all. The girl then flirts with Mitchell, saying that he's totally her type, and asks if he wants to grab coffee after the session. Gia is shocked. She knows she's not supposed to get involved in Mitchell's interactions like this, but she can't hold back. "Mitchell!" she calls out, her voice a mix of surprise and frustration. Mitchell, unfazed by the flirtation, calmly responds, "I'm married," and then, to Gia's surprise, announces to the whole gym, "This is my wife, Gia." The gym falls silent. The girl, clearly embarrassed, flees the scene, her face flushed with humiliation. Gia stands there, stunned, a wave of heat rushing to her own cheeks. As they leave the gym, Gia can't contain her curiosity. "Does this kind of thing happen often?" she asks Minchil, trying to keep her voice steady. Minchia, clearly used to these kinds of situations, shrugs casually. "It happens sometimes, but I always decline," he explains. "I don't want to go to a cafe or a bar after a workout because there's nothing to eat." He pauses for a moment, then adds with a smirk, "But I would go if they served protein shakes." Gia can't help but laugh despite herself, but she's also relieved. Minchiel is completely unfazed by the attention and has no interest in anything other than his post-workout routine.